everybody to this really, what for us I think is a very exciting event. And I just wanted to really thank everybody who's joining us now for this seminal discussion. I hope that everybody had a chance to actually watch the video during this last 20 or 30 minutes. If you did not have a chance to watch it or couldn't find the link or had trouble for any reason, we will leave that link up there, and we would encourage you to go back and take a look at it when you have a chance. Most of you know me. My name's Bonnie Bright, and I founded the Alliance almost 5 years ago now. And you can see on your screen 4 of the other board members that we have. We have a total of 9 board members, and we also have a couple of board members who are on the phone who were unable to be in front of a computer at this time. But I'd like to welcome all of you guys and thank you for being with me, and we'll have a chance to sort of go through and let everybody say a few words of introduction before we go too much farther. And then the way that I see this sort of unfolding is really we want to have a juicy discussion about depth psychology. And I don't know what that really entails just yet, but I think some things will unfold in that discussion. I also wanted to just thank James for that amazing video. And I really feel like this is a celebration of something important that's happening here, and that is the opportunity for us to, as a board and hopefully as a community, so that involves everybody who's listening to this. I should put my headphones in. I can hear somebody on the phone who's not muted, and I'm sorry, this is a real problem with this software and with many softwares. So if you have some noise in the background, everybody should be muted, but if you're calling in by phone, I can't mute you. So just be aware of that. Technology. That's a real trickster thing that goes on with these. So what I'd like to do is, again, I was just saying this is a real celebration because we're hoping as a board, it's been our mission now for the couple of years that we've been together as a board, to really make depth psychology more accessible in the world. And I can speak for myself, but I know when I sort of discovered depth psychology, or maybe I like to say when it discovered me, it really profoundly changed my life, profoundly. And I want to personally do all that I can to make that opportunity available to other people, because I had never even heard of depth psychology and had barely read a few words of Jung when that happened. And so, so this we hope is going to be a discussion about what depth psychology is, and if you have resistance to defining it, I think that's a good thing, because I also have some resistance to defining it. What I'd really like to do is open up the discussion to what that could be, and really want to involve everybody that's in the community in this, and also let you know that this is going to be a theme that we're going to be pursuing for the next, I don't know, however many months or years. Really inquiring into psychology. Yeah, right. Yeah, till we finally get it down. Thanks, James. I mean, we've had a lot of discussions about how depth psychology often fosters questions instead of answers. It's almost impossible on some level to get some answers. Of course, there is history and that kind of thing. So thank you for that. So I'm going to stop talking and let you guys talk. And for the audience, actually, if you've not used GoToWebinar before, you should notice a little excuse me, a little icon on your computer somewhere that has a hand on it. And that hand, if you click on it, it will actually show me that you're raising your hand, and then I can unmute you so that you can talk. And really hope you guys will be willing to talk. There's also a chat function, so there should be a little icon that has a kind of the bubble. If you click on that, you can actually chat, and everybody in the session here will be able to see what you're saying by chat. And then you can also go to the homepage on Depth Psychology Alliance, and I see a lot of you guys are on. Thank you, Holly. There's a chat function on Depth Psychology Alliance. All you have to do is click on the chat link in the top menu, and that will open up the chat for you. And Holly, thank you for contributing. Holly's been a regular on that chat function, particularly after the alchemy class sessions that have been happening with Robert Wozniak and Pat Berry. So Eva, hi, I see you over there. So I encourage you guys to go ahead and have that conversation amongst yourselves. And by the way, you don't have to wait until we're doing a live session like this to use that chat function. Every time you come on the Alliance, please feel free to drop a line in there to your fellow community members and hopefully we can have more sort of crosstalk and activities and that kind of thing. So let's go ahead and get started. What I'd like to do is just have each of the board members go through and say a few words about themselves. What you'd like to be, what we'd like people to know about you. For our audience, everybody can read bios for the board members. If you go under the About link on the Alliance, and then you'll see under About there is a link under that called Administrative Board. This is our working day-to-day hands-on group here that is designing what we'd like to see happen for the Alliance. So if you guys will just kind of go in order and say a few words, and then offline on the phone we have Linda Ravenswood, and I know Donna has not yet been able to get on, but we'll see if we can troubleshoot that. So Donna May. And then Jesse Masterson, who is located in an area right now where they're having some severe storm weather and tornado warnings, and so he was not sure if he would be able to get on, and unfortunately I don't see him yet, so we're hoping that he's fine and all is well with him. And then one more board member, Mark Sipowicz, who is on the road with his family this weekend and was unable to attend live but really wanted to be here. So we know that those who are not on with us are with us in spirit, and I encourage you guys to reach out to them through the messaging function on the Alliance and to read their bios, and we'll be doing more of these kinds of things. So I think there will be more opportunities for this. So technology willing. What we're really trying to do is just be experimental here and do the best that we can to start having these kinds of conversations. And if technology complies, that's great. I hope the experience isn't too horrible for you guys with some of the audio issues and things that we were having. But all in all, I'm really excited about this new initiative, and let's go. So James, as the filmmaker, and since we're celebrating and using your video as a portal to this whole conversation, I'd love to just hear a few words from you and just kick us off.
My name is James Newell, and I am a musician and an online educator, and happy to be here. I'm excited that everybody's interested in depth psychology and wants to keep talking about it.
Okay. Brent, go ahead.
Oh, hey, yeah, I really like that video quite a bit too. It's really hard to, it must have been challenging to try and take depth psychology, roughly 100 years, and compress it into something that's digestible. It's pretty awesome. So yeah, I'm Brent. I'm an author and a clinician. I write quite a bit about depth psychology, and also as it pertains to clinical issues in the present. So a lot of writing about trauma and actually how it informs care and things like that. So, thanks.
Great, thanks. Craig.
Hi, everybody. I'm Craig Chalquist. I'm Department Chair of East-West Psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and I love to write about depth psychology, and I was thinking when I watched the video I had wished that I had had a great resource like that when I was a student. So, well done.
Thank you.
Eva, go ahead.
Amazing video, James. It's just evolved since the first time I've seen it. I'm going to go back and watch it again. I'm Eva Ryder. I'm a depth psychological clinician. I'm a dream worker, and I do some body-soul synthesis and teach workshops, which in terms of what's coming up, I'm very excited. As of yesterday, I'm going to Guelph, Ontario to Sacred Wisdom Center in July, and I'll be presenting on the alchemy in Snow White and as reclaiming self, and also a webinar coming up on my passion, the Tree of Life, with Bonnie. So
Yay.
That's May 21st.
Fantastic.
So thank you. So excited to be here with you.
Great. Thank you, Eva. Linda, can you say a few words? I know we can't see you, but we can hear you.
Hi, I'm Linda Ravenswood. I'm an artist and filmmaker, and I just finished my coursework at Pacifica last year now, and my dissertation is on stewardship, cultural stewardship, and so being a part of the Depth Alliance is really ties in with that work and with that hope, and I'm really very happy to be here with you guys, and sorry about my computer glitches, but I am here on the phone listening in.
Great, thank you. Well, we have our share of computer glitches going around. So it's perfectly fine. And you guys that are on the call, I know sometimes you have some of these issues too. And again, we're just really excited to be able to do this. It's kind of a premier event for us to be able to see people's faces. And I see on the chat on the homepage, Holly was commenting that it's really cool to hear everybody's voices. And I would add, I think it's cool to see everybody. I mean, we do our board meetings like this, and so I see these guys on rare occasion, but it's impossible to get us all in the same room. And of course, for the Alliance, it's impossible to get all of us even in the same country. So, this has really been fun for us to sort of try technology and try to build something that is depth psychological in an online format. And some people don't believe it can be done. And I mean, the jury's probably still out, I guess, on some level, but I'm personally just feel something really exciting that I attribute to something collective and something sort of rising up to put this many people that are really interested in having this kind of a discussion together via technology and be able to hopefully further the work. So I'd love to hear from you guys a little bit about your own experience with depth psychology. Again, I think we've established we can't really define it so much. James did a fantastic job presenting a history of sorts in the video and really showing some of the different facets of it. And certainly those are all up for debate. I hope that you guys will comment on anything that struck you from the video that was interesting to you, maybe that you hadn't heard before, or that you really liked. So for the audience members, again, please feel free to just raise your hand at any point in time, and we'll go ahead and take questions. You can raise your hand by clicking that little icon on your computer. You should see one with a hand on it. And then you can also use the chat function if you'd like. All right, and keep an eye on the homepage. I'm sorry, I keep looking over here because my other computer screen where the homepage for Depth Psychology Alliance is over here. So if you can go back and forth from this to the home screen, feel free to look at that and read the chat. So Holly's saying it's more exciting to hear voices than seeing faces. So that's great. So I just love to hear about you guys and how you found depth psychology, or how depth psychology found you. What was it that intrigued you? Was it called depth psychology when you found it, or was it some other something else? And I'll just let anybody who'd like to talk jump in there. Eventually, I'd like to ask James how he was motivated to make this video, because it's really an amazing feat to put together an entire script and a video and find the images and do all the research and all of that. So maybe let's start with that, actually, James, since we're there, and then let's just open that conversation too.
Sure. Sorry, my phone's ringing.
Okay.
It mainly came from my the board was talking about how doing educational things, how to do them, and I was working online in classes where I was creating videos, and I thought, gee, I wonder what happened if we had something that just addressed that. And my thought was, I'm more of a classical Jungian, and I was thinking, well, I'd like to do a video on classical Jungian stuff. I thought, well, it's not the classical Jungian Alliance, it's the Depth Psychology Alliance, so I should really try to cover that. And I said, well, that's ridiculous, that's impossible. So I had to be I started thinking in terms of infotainment, the PBS things where you kind of just crush everything down to its most minimalist sound bites and tried to patch it together, but mainly because I see that there's a sense that everybody's opening up to their intuitive selves, and they love depth psychology, and they get into depth psychology, and it becomes apparently this boundaryless morass of everything is everything, and we can just throw a little shamanism in with a little bit of Freud, and then we've got something, and we do, but there also are boundaries, and I think the more we can start with clear distinctions between things and kind of know that we're going from this to that, and we're not just doing everything isn't everything. There's reasons that things work in particular ways, and so starting with a real base, I always think for me, that's the way I think that's a good way to start. So I wanted to see if we could. I wanted it to be two functions. One of just kind of demonstrating the kind of things we could do for the Alliance, of having educational products available, not products, but items available for people to access at any time, and introductory levels, so anybody coming in can see them, and at the same time providing that introduction to depth psychology. And I'm glad if it's been effective, and I know it's very minimal, but it's a starting place. So that's what I hoped it would be. So I hope it is that.
Yeah, fantastic. I think it's a great starting place. You know, I mean, we need more of these kinds of things if we really want to get depth psychology out there in the world. So I hope that everybody who's listening to this will spark something for them. And if anybody wants to sort of work collaboratively on projects like this, putting together videos or whatever it is, I love the idea of multimedia, because that reaches people in a very different way than just reading books. And of course, there are a lot of books and articles available on depth psychology kind of in general, but I love it. I think it's great. So, hopefully we'll start building a library of these kinds of things, and we're grateful for that. Very exciting. Anybody else want to jump in and just share a little bit about how depth psychology discovered you?
I will.
Great.
I was struck by James's video when he spoke about experimental psychology, because that's how I started. My first year was at McGill, and all they were teaching in 1973 was experimental psychology. And so I started with Pavlov and Skinner and abnormal psych, and then dropped out before rat lab class. And because anyway, I didn't like rats all that much. I didn't want to work with them in any format. So I dropped out, and I actually switched to history and did this roundabout and came to Jung that way. And I don't even know how it happened. But depth psychology, as Bonnie, as you mentioned, is something that grabs a hold of you and just drags you there. And I think it began with a kind of a spiritual search for meaning. And so that, in a nutshell, a little bit of my response to James. I was struck by that.
It's great. Go ahead, Craig.
So when I was an undergrad, I can't remember if I think I was a freshman. I found myself in a mall. So mine starts in the underworld. I was in a mall in Thousand Oaks, California, and I was looking for books to read. I was kind of tired of science fiction, and I wandered over to the psychology shelf, and there was a book by Karen Horney called Self-Analysis, and I just kind of grabbed it at random, and I began reading it over the summer when I was gearing up for the next semester. And the two things I realized reading that book, there was a lot of it I didn't understand because I didn't have any kind of psychology background, but the first thing I thought was, I'm way more neurotic than I realized that I am. And then the second thing was, I really need to study psychology. This is amazing. And so I got more books after that. And then I ended up in an English class with Dr. Sigmar Schwartz, who still teaches, I believe, at Cal Lutheran University, where I was going to school. And he said, you should read Jung. And he gave me The Undiscovered Self. And then after that, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. So that was my way in. A mall and the realization I was neurotic, and Karen Horney and my mentor Sigmar Schwartz.
That's your story, and you're sticking to it, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was in seventh grade, as a little kid, I was really interested in dreams, and really interested in dreams. And when my family had moved from California to Washington, we were out like way in the woods, and so I had a very great experience with nature and with dreams. And I remember one day just asking my mom, wouldn't it be cool if there was someone who knew a lot about dreams, like someone you could talk to? And she said, they're called psychologists. And so I was like, no way, that's awesome. There's a group of people who actually like this too. And so I went to the phone book. We had phone books and rotary phones. And I looked up psychologists, and I just started dialing down the list until there was one or two that picked up. And then so I talked, and I said, I'm really interested in dreams. And one guy said, and I wish I remember who this guy was. I would thank him if I could find him. But he said, I don't know much about this dream stuff, but if you're interested in that, there was a guy, his name's Sigmund Freud, and that's the person that you should read. And so in 7th grade, I went to the library, I started
Wow.
reading through it and never looked back. And then the next kind of moment was when I was in Bellingham, Washington in 1998, I think it was. And the school I was going to had a therapy requirement, and I didn't know what to do about that. And I was literally standing outside of my apartment, and my friend said, "There's a Jungian analyst right down the street, literally right above Tony's Coffee in Fairhaven." I said, "No way." And so I called him. I think the therapy requirement was like a handful of hours. And I went in there to this Jungian analyst, and I was like, "Okay, so what do we do?" And he was like, "Well, okay, this is," and he explained Jungian analysis to me a little bit. And I thought I'd be there for 5 or 10 hours, whatever it was. And 8, 9, 10 years later, was still in a Jungian analysis, and during that time discovered Wilfred Bion and Martin Heidegger. And so it's just been the path that I'm called to and love very much.
Great. I just want to interject here too. We do have some questions coming in, so I've been trying to monitor those, and I'll keep doing that. If you guys, I know we can see each other, most of us who are on the computer, but we do have a few people that can't see us and they don't know who's talking. So if you can just say your name before you talk for the panel, that would be helpful, I think. And I know someone was asking Brent, Brent's last name, it's Brent Potter. And you guys, again, can find all of our bios on the Alliance. If you go to the About tab, then you'll see something for the administrative board there. And so you'll see all of our names and bios there, and pictures, by the way. So feel free to do that. And I wanted to say, Donna, I'm so sorry. Donna's really having trouble getting on. And it's just, I've had these same issues before too. So just one of those days. But she is commenting on the chat function on the Alliance. So she wanted to share a little bit of her story about how she came to depth psychology. So I'll just read you what she wrote, or you can go to the homepage and read it yourself on the chat. But she says, "My journey with depth psychology was via a 12-step program. Carl Jung played an instrumental part in the beginnings of Alcoholics Anonymous." I think a lot of you guys know that already, of course. And then she said, "I then heard a quote of Carl Jung that pierced my soul. There is no birth of consciousness without pain." So her entry was through the pain. Right. Linda, did you want to say something? Since I can't see you, I don't know if you're getting ready to talk, but do you want to share a little bit about how you came to depth psychology? Linda may be muted.
I think I'm unmuted now.
You are, yes.
Okay, great. Let's see. When I was a little kid, a friend of mine named Justin Ayers and his old father, Lou Ayers, I got to know their family very well, and Lou Ayres went around the world, and he did films, of course, early in his career. But as he got to be an old man, he did a film called Altars of the World, where he took his camera crew and he went to speak with the Jains in India, and he went all over the place. And I guess in the 60s and 70s. That was sort of unusual for someone in the West to do that. It was still sort of like, what's yoga? You know, there was a bit of exotic sort of quality to that. And we have a place here in Los Angeles called the Philosophical Research Society. And Manly Hall is the founder of that. And so Lou was very old and of an age where he knew all the old folks in the sort of burgeoning, new concepts, for ancient concepts, but new to the West, sort of process of us here, and especially on the West Coast, finding out about, ancient things. And let's see. So when I was a kid, I was around that, when the Jung film came out. Lou and all of his cronies, these ancient guys here in Los Angeles, part of the Philosophical Research Society, they took young Justin and me, and we saw the Carl Jung film, A Matter of Heart, and with all the producers there and everybody, and they were all ancient people, and just us two little kids. And I guess, all of this profundity made a big impact on both of us. And Justin actually went to Pacifica first. He graduated in, I think, 2000. let's see, and then I started in, I guess, 2011, and I just graduated. And it's very strange to me that from those early beginnings, being here in Hollywood with people who were very interested in Blavatsky and in Jung, and the people who were really trying to promulgate all of that sort of what we called New Age, which is really old age work, that would be so profoundly impacting on both of us, and that we would both be gravitate towards Pacifica so strangely at two different times. So I think, yeah, that's sort of how it all came about. Just
Well, I love that,
yeah.
Linda. Thank you, because, you know, I mean, we're getting completely different perspectives. And I mean, every one of us, and I'm sure every one of the members that are listening to this call right now, have come to it from an entirely different way or different approach. And yet somehow depth psychology found each of us. I've been really remiss. I have to apologize. Michael, are you on the phone? Michael Bogar? So Michael is also an Alliance member, and I'm so sorry because it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So I mentioned Jesse, who may be dealing with storms, Jesse Masterson. I mentioned Donna May, who's had some trouble getting on the call, but who is on the chat function on the homepage. And I also mentioned Mark Sipowicz, who is traveling with his family this weekend. But Michael Bogar is also an Alliance member, and I know Michael sometimes calls in by phone. And by the way, you guys, if you call in by phone, I sometimes can't see your name listed as part of the session. So if anybody's on the phone and I haven't addressed you, then it's probably because I can't see you and I don't know you're there. So I wanted to just touch in real quickly. We talked a lot about Jung, or we will, and we probably, I mean, we can and we probably will. But there are also a number of people, some of whom James talked about a little bit in his film. But I wondered actually if we can address some of the who some of the seldom mentioned figures in depth psychology are, and is that a controversial question? Because, you know, a lot of people that I know are even just say, well, Jung was the father of depth psychology. Well, of course we know that there were many people involved in that. Sure, he was one of the pioneers, and it's a pretty simplistic way to look at Jung as being the father of it. I think those of us who have studied it formally probably certainly have that understanding that it was certainly a number of people contributing to the field. And one of my favorite books about the sort of history of depth psychology is called Discovery of the Unconscious. It's kind of a thick book. I forget who wrote that. Was that Ellen Berger's? Some of you guys will know that. I have it on my shelf. I can pull it out. But anyway, Craig, I know we were having that conversation the other day. I wondered if you would just jump in there and share a little bit, because your history of depth psychology is pretty impressive.
There's one person who always stands out for me. We could mention bunches of them, and I actually mentioned Karen Horney earlier, who was a depth practitioner as well as a humanistic psychologist. But the one who often doesn't get mentioned is Pierre Janet. And you know, he was when Freud was first starting to practice, and when Jean-Martin Charcot was over in France doing hypnotism and up on stage to impress people and all that. One of his students was Janet, and he was actually working at in the hospital as a volunteer with a number of people who were traumatized. And he gave us early trauma theory. He worked with dissociation a lot, which Jung cites in his work. He worked with the transference. He taught his patients how to do free association and write down their associations. He had a fully dynamic theory of the mind. He called it psychological analysis. And all this is like, you know, between the mid to late 1800s. And he also gave us the word subconscious after a patient of his named Lonnie was complaining about not knowing why she was sad. So I always feel like his absence somehow in a lot of the discussions of depth psychology. So I just wanted to mention him and give him a little attention too.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. You know, one thing I wanted to bring up is that this is actually in relation to something that James said when you were talking about sort of having at least some kind of structure or, you know, for depth psychology so that it's not kind of all muddled together. And I probably am guilty of that on regular occasion, because when I first learned about depth psychology, it was under the umbrella of study of the unconscious. So, you know, what symbols are coming to us, what are archetypes, which we do have a question from the audience about archetypes, and I want to go to that shortly. But as I moved on and did more of my education at Pacifica is really a a great, well-rounded program in the sense that they bring a lot of things in that I had never thought about or never heard about from a depth psychological standpoint. And one of those things is psychologies of liberation, which is really looking at a lot of our culture, the tenets that our cultures are founded on. It looks at colonization and how in the history of the world, what social relations have been between countries when one country would go in and take over another country and colonize it. And that leads to all kinds of social issues. It also leads to eco-psychology and the way that we treat the earth and the planet. So I certainly consider those fields kind of under the umbrella of Jung's psychology. And of course, I also think other things fall under that. Shamanism definitely, for me at least, falls under the umbrella of depth psychology. You guys, some of you might argue actually that it's not, and it's a total separate thing. But one thing that I would suggest is that maybe it's the archetype of shamanism that I'm interested in, because there's definitely an underlying pattern to the shaman, who is the one who is in contact with the unconscious and can use that information that he or she is receiving in order to bring that back to the community and provide either healing or knowledge or something for them. So I don't know. I'm curious for you guys. I mean, what I think Jung actually also wanted to, he really wanted to make depth psychology a science, at least in the early parts of his life. And I think as he went on too, he also opened a lot to, if he wasn't already, to the mystical things and different sciences that would also fit under. So for him, I think he probably also sort of saw depth psychology as having a lot of different building blocks. What do you guys think about that? And I mean, are there things that we should be mentioning here that sort of fall under the umbrella for you that are important to kind of name and articulate?
I think that for depth psychology, strictly speaking, that's the term that Eugene Boiler used to refer to Freud's. That's to do with the depths, but like how Hillman pointed out, Freud's kind of gift to psychology was returning it to its roots, cultural roots in Mediterranean mythology. So it's a return. In some ways, we can pinpoint where depth psychology comes into play, but Freud and then Jung after him are really articulating very ancient cultures in a lot of ways, particularly the Greek culture, to such an extent that, at least for me, the more I understand Greek antiquity, the more Freud and Jung make a lot more sense. And so I think that's kind of where the shamanism aspect comes in. Not that they had shamans, strictly speaking, but the kind of ancient wisdom systems that are in place is really what depth psychology is dialing into, articulating in the present and then moving into the future. Or at least that's how I kind of take it up.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, just briefly, Brent's statement reminded me of astrology and how astrology is an archetypal language that is derived from the Greek. And in the sense, as Marion Woodman used to say, we are the Greeks. And to a large extent, that is where our Western culture evolved from. So in terms of our thought processes, it's very much coming from that ancient mythological system of knowing. And that's changing, I think, right, as it's broadening, expanding as we move into becoming a global community.
Can you say more about that? Can you just say a little bit more about how you see that?
Becoming a global community. Well, we're seeing a convergence of cultures from all over the world. Just being in Ireland, I was struck by how being an island, it's like flocks of birds flying in from different parts of the world and different countries, and people come, because they're escaping different regimes, and they land there, and then they leave again. And I was really struck by how we're all in motion right now, and how all different cultures and races and religions, everything's converging and changing and becoming something else. Mm-hmm. That's my sense of it, and I think more than ever, depth psychology then becomes something that's vertical. I think of it as vertical, whereas when we were talking about the experimental and the more objective scientific approaches to psychology. It was much more of a horizontal thing, where we're looking at the world as the way we project onto it, as Hillman said. This way, straight across. But now depth psychology takes us into a vertical, where we're connecting with spirit and with body and with soul. I see soul as mediator between spirit and body and the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's we're having to reclaim and understand, get a stand in who we are, and then from that point reach out into community and discovering that that's where our humanity is.
Yeah, you're making me think a lot about your comment about people coming from all over the world and how we're always on the move. It's making me think of transiency, you know, this whole idea of the transient self, which there's a Jungian analyst from Israel, Erel Shalit. Some of you might know his work. He's really done a remarkable work on the transient self. And I've sort of thought about this for a long time, about how technology makes us more transient, you know, this whole idea of globalization that you were mentioning. And also in the news lately, we've had all these reports, just one after another, of the migrants or the refugees who are trying to come primarily from Africa and cross over and landing, you know, in Italy or in the southernmost parts of Europe. And, you know, just how mass amounts of people are doing this. And it's been that way probably for, you know, entire history of the world, but it just seems to be really front and center, at least for me right now. It's a symbol. It's something that's emerging that's really powerful. And this makes me think, if we look at the outer world and the inner world, which I'm so fond of doing from a depth psychological standpoint, because I so much believe that the outer world is reflecting what's going on for us in the inner world. And I see this archetype of the refugee. I see this archetype of displacement, and I relate that to kind of a displaced psyche. You know, the fact that as a general rule in our culture, we are not encouraged to be grounded or homed into a certain place. And our psyches, the same thing. We're kind of, as a general rule, again, I'm generalizing, because people who are practicing depth psychology and really trying to do this work, I think at least are sometimes a little more conscious of what's happening. But we're massively displaced, and we don't come home to the self, the archetypal self with a capital S, as Jung described it. We aren't checking in regularly with something bigger than us. We aren't tapping into the numinous necessarily deliberately, although if you at least give yourself a little space to sit back and see a sunset, or, you know, you see it in a child, or you see it in a flower, or connecting with nature. What do you guys think about the role of depth psychology in serving our culture, whether it's helping with that whole idea of displaced psyche or something else? Where does the culture need it the most, and how can it be the most helpful? And or should it even be employed, quote unquote, as a tool that will help?
This is James. I think part of the, for me, a connection of all these themes is that the mythological and the shaman and certainly the Greek in terms of mythology in any case, these are all pre-modern phenomena, and in the pre-modern sense, people were encased in those myths and were involved in those myths, identified with those myths. And there's at least the modern myth is that we have entered the age of reason, and we've become aware, and we know that these things, we poo-poo those things and say, well, they weren't what we thought they were, so let's just throw them out, and then we go on. And we found that that's not working. And the role of depth psychology is not to return to the old state of mind where we're encased in the myth, but we have a modern standpoint. It's more of a, not postmodern in the Derrida modern intellectualist approach, but it's postmodern in the sense we're moving beyond the modern opinion of having been positivist and figured everything out. And depth psychology takes us back into a realm that was once mysterious because we were encased in it, and now it's mysterious still, but we need to be able to not be possessed by the archetype. There's this thing with symbols where there's two fallacies. There's a fallacy of being concretist. We take the symbol as being that's what it is. It's the shaman really is in touch with the mystical world, and he may be, but the concretist says that that's all that he is. It's not about psyche. It's not about anything. He's really doing these things. And the reductionist is the other fallacy, and he says, no, that's the modern person. He says, no, the shaman, that's just nonsense. He's just psychotic or something. He's not doing it. And the third position is hopefully the depth psychology position, where we say, no, it is real, but it's real, and we know empirically that it's a reality of the psyche. And when we make that distinction, that's a very modern distinction. That's not what they were doing in ancient times. So we are reclaiming the ancient things, but we're doing it from a modern perspective. If we lose the modern perspective, then we have additional problems. And it's kind of what Jung called a regressive restoration of the persona in a way, culturally. So the role culturally is to maintain that connection with the archetypal field without being alienated from it and without being identified with it, and maintain that. Edinger calls it an archetypal, the ego-self axis, where we're constantly in touch with the archetypal field without being possessed by it nor alienated from it. And that takes a lot of effort, and one of the best ways the ancients knew how to do this, but they did it unconsciously, and the best way is through spiritual practice. And often, not always, but spiritual practice or some kind of conscious engagement with something that's numinous for us. And so that, for me, whatever realm we're talking about, if we're doing that, if we're being modern and yet still respectful of the numinous and of that archetypal field, then we're doing something.
Well, the cultural overlay tends to disguise more than it reveals about archetypes. And so that's what makes depth psychology necessary. Heidegger talks about this with the Greek notion of phenomenon is basically something that disguises itself and shows itself at the same time. And so that's what makes phenomenology and depth psychology necessary, because without it, we wouldn't know that the myth, we're living myths before we call them myths. I think James Hillman said that. And the myth that we're living today is technology. And we're like a fish doesn't know it's wet. We don't even know how much that impacts us and what it means in terms of like what you're talking about, Bonnie, with the kind of, and Heidegger talked about this too, with the technological way of knowing, a kind of anomie or homelessness was another word that he used. But at the same time, the same phenomenon is able to connect us in ways that we would never be able to before. So it's kind of holding the tension between the two and figuring that out. So that's one concrete way that depth psychology is very necessary today to understand our place in things.
Right. Sorry, I just decided to record this video if we can. I think that's a really important point, and it brings up for me, probably most of you guys are familiar with Jung's Red Book, at least to a certain extent, and you know that in the Red Book he talks about the spirit of the times versus the spirit of the depths, and how those two are quite different from each other, and how we are currently living in the spirit of the times. So for those of you who are more familiar with the Red Book, or does anybody want to jump in on that and just talk a little bit about that for the benefit of everybody? Can somebody frame that?
I had brought it up last night, Bonnie, and the truth is I haven't read the Red Book, and I've just begun to read it, realizing I had a real resistance to reading the commentaries about the Red Book. I had a feeling that I needed to approach it without having read other people's views on it. And so I had put it aside, even though I had purchased it way, way, way back. And then in the process of this, as we were talking, it just came to me that, wait a second, this is exactly what we're talking about on the Depth Psychology Alliance. We're moving, the spirit of the times is, and I found a couple of quotes by Jung, is so in the Red Book last night about the spirit of the conversation he has in the beginning pages between the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depths, and the spirit of the times bringing us back to what is about value, and what is about it's what was the other word that he used? It's value, and it's about what we put value on and what is a meaning. We lose ourselves in it. We lose our relationship to ourselves as we're striving to be consumers, for one thing, right? And we become a product. I mean, that's a terrible thing. I mean, that you begin to feel like you're just a cog in the wheel. And I think Joseph Campbell spoke about that and how important then it is to find that sacred place again, where we are, who are we in relation to the universe and to our community. And so then creating, we're at it, as you mentioned, Bonnie, you know, we are lost at this point. I mean, I've been unrooted, I think, most of my life, because I did come from a refugee family, and then I grew up in Canada, and then I'm in the United States, and while I was in Ireland, people would ask me where I was from, and that would come up, that I said, well, you know, as John O'Donoghue said, I'm from nowhere at this point, and we're all from nowhere. And that's a good starting point, really, because from that place, we can maybe transcend what has been placed upon us in the spirit of our times, which are so much in flux, and move back into a place of depth where we can begin to connect with our community. And I can't find the exact quote, but it's right here. And Jung actually talks about that in the Red Book. You know.
Eva, I cannot wait for the webinar that we're doing together. It starts, just for those of you who are listening, it starts on May 21st, and we're going to do a 4-webinar series. Eva, I mean, you're just the way that you talk about it is so approachable and accessible. I really appreciate you bringing that up. And also, I mean, obviously, for each of us, in the field of depth psychology, each of our own backgrounds is going to play very significantly into how we perceive depth psychology and what is the most meaningful for us. I almost feel like we're just kind of grabbing a thread, and of course that's whatever thread is the color that appeals to us most because of our background, because of the conditioning that we have, is the one that we're going to start pulling first. But eventually, if you keep pulling that thread, you're going to get the whole rainbow of spectrum, and hopefully be able to sort of immerse ourselves into that realm of depth psychological thinking that will enable us to create some of the transformation that we're looking for. I wanted to get to a couple of the questions from some audience members. I want to keep an eye on the time too, because we still have a few things that would be nice to discuss. And then Craig, I really want to ask you a question. So I'm just warning you now. Hold that thought. So meanwhile, let's see. We have a question here that says, in terms and context of depth psychology, please comment on the archetype of the self and the archetypal self. So the archetype of the self with a capital S, which is Jung's idea, and I'm sure most people here are familiar with that, and the archetypal self. Does anybody want to take that on?
I don't know of any distinction between the two. I mean, they're both two ways of saying the same thing. I mean, there's the little s self, which is ego, and the archetypal self, or the archetype of the self, one to be more personalized maybe, but they're, in other words, my archetypal self, or the archetypal self, which is kind of a construct. They're all metaphors. There's no really, if we do, you know, an anatomical surgery, we're not going to find the archetypal self, but it's a metaphor for an organizational principle that is somewhere, it's observable in cultural artifacts, but not necessarily anatomically.
That is a great description, and of course, that organization. I forget now what you just said, but it's that idea of something that is organized. It's self-organized, I guess you could almost say. Jung at one point referred to that as God, did he not?
Well, God imago. I mean, the thing is, if there's something, it depends on your whole your philosophical underpinnings. But Jung at least tried in his collected works to never say that, but to say that there is absolutely and empirically a God imago, and there's implications for that, but not that it's that's a whole big. I mean, I heard somebody recently say that was a question once in Zurich at the Jungian analyst thing. Is the archetype of the self the same as God? And the answer is no. It's not. It's an imago, and it's a metaphor for the organizational principle that seems to represent God for people. I mean, it's complex and simple at the same time.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say an analogy in response to what James is saying, is that many, many years ago, when I was one of those altered state experiences, I had an image of the sun, and the realization that the sun is just an imago, it's an image. I don't think I had that language at the time, and that really that what we call God is behind the sun. You know, and the sun is a symbol of something else. And I think all symbols are really just that. They're just reflecting the archetypal energy that's behind it. And even the archetypal energy isn't God, right? there are patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So
that comes back to your I come from nowhere on some level. You know, it's like what's the beginning?
Yeah, and certainly a believer can say that behind whatever motivates the psyche, a materialist is going to say that it's biochemical reactions, and a believer can say, well, behind that is God. But those are all metaphysical concerns. They're not, or scientific concerns, depending on what your basis is. But either way, Jung, at least ideally, is not making any of those claims. And someone like Hillman doesn't put much weight on the archetypal self at all.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways.
Good. Thank you, guys. Thanks, James. I hope Jonathan is the one that asked that question, and I hope that answered it. And if it didn't, or if it did, please feel free to jump in and either ask another question, make a comment by text, or again, anybody who would like to say something aloud, we'd love to hear your voices. So feel free to just raise your electronic hand by clicking on that hand icon, and we'll take your questions. I can unmute you. Meanwhile, I wanted to sort of just transition a little bit because we do have just a few minutes left. So, Craig, I know that you do a lot of work, really profound work, I think, in this idea of mythic activism, and I'll let you say a few words about what that is, because obviously you can describe it far better than me. But I think it's a really important aspect of depth psychology, and that is we haven't really talked a lot, right, in this particular session about whether or not depth psychology is sort of a fixed field. You know, after 100 years, what's happened with depth psychology? I mean, is depth psychology a field that you can go learn about and sort of understand the background, or is it dynamic and changing? And if so, how does the idea of activism fit within that? So that is a really broad. I'm not looking for a specific answer, obviously. I'd like to hear your take on just sort of that whole general category.
It fits right over here in this little
in your pocket.
It's interesting to me that so many early depth psychologists were activists. Reich, Adler, who they call Adler in the States, a lot of them were, or they had causes that they espoused, That's often forgotten in the whole debate about whether a depth psychologist should be an activist or not. And so for me, I never felt called to actually go out on protests and things like that, but I have a lot of students and colleagues who are activists, and I recognize that at least in this country, some of the rights that we still have left are because activists defend them. So I've been thinking about that question a lot without really settling on anything, and I'm still thinking about it. But what I wanted to do was be able to identify myths and archetypes that are coming up in contemporary struggles and find ways to help people give voice to that as a way of shifting consciousness. So the sort of activism that I am interested in doing involves that. And so to give a really specific example of that, a while back I noticed that there was a lot of underworld imagery that flowed with oil, with petroleum, and wherever the oil flows, the imagery of Hades and the underworld seems to follow very closely in its footsteps. So I wrote a piece, I'll type it in here in a minute, but I wrote a piece called A Brief Mythology of Petroleum, and I put it on the internet as my own small version of mythic activism to get people thinking that when we put petroleum in our cars, we're putting Hades in there and all of his dark gods as well, One example that always comes to mind is the rivers that burn when petroleum floods into them. And that immediately reminds me mythologically of Phlegethon, the Greek mythic image of the river in hell that burns eternally. So, and yet, in contrast to that, when we have wind and solar and other kinds of energy that are clean, then we were dealing with Helios and Aeolus and some of the other, and Gaia, of course, some of the other pantheons. So a mythic activist way of holding all this would be just to say that when we think about energy sources, there's the literal level of, you know, what consequence flows from the kind of energy that we get, but there's also a pantheon that we're dealing with, different pantheons and different gods as well. So that'd be a quick example of that.
Great, thank you. Well, I bring up the activism because for me, I have a real personal interest in applying what's going on in our culture and to depth psychology, to looking at it through a depth psychological lens. And you just do that really well. I think you have such a gift for that. But I also wanted to sort of invoke the word activism, because I think it's kind of a buzzword. A lot of people, when I say that, I mean a lot of people have some kind of connotation associated with activism. And I know because many of you as members of the Alliance have told me that you're introverts, that particularly as introverts, I think we can be pretty intimidated by the idea of activism. But for the Alliance itself, you know, when I first created it all those years ago, it happened really organically. I never had like a plan for it per se. I just wanted a place that could be accessed globally by everybody, where we could have these kinds of conversations and find more information and learn. So I was really in a learning mode because I was a grad student, and that was kind of the mode I was in. But the board, whom you see here on your screen, and also those who are offline, either on the phone or listening in, we had a lot of discussions lately about what that means. And Craig, I know one of the questions that you sort of brought up, which I wish we would have time to discuss, and maybe we still will have a few minutes to do that, is where the field of depth psychology needs to awaken and transform. But I wanted to parlay that to the Alliance and say that I think the Alliance is sort of emerging as an opportunity for where depth psychology is kind of coming alive and wanting to transform a little bit. And that is in the sense that we have now 4,000 members, and an amazing opportunity for us who are involved in this community to start collaborating and actually doing work that we are passionate about, that we feel called to do as sole stewards on the planet, or as stewards of the earth, or whatever your passion is. That there are so many opportunities for us to connect with each other. And so I just wanted to say a word about that, and that is, it feels to me like the Alliance wants that, and possibly the Alliance is an extension of the field of depth psychology, which is itself awakening in certain areas, transforming, evolving. And so just a really quick look at where I hope the future of the Alliance is going, and our vision as a board, at least, is that it will be more transformed to more opportunities for activism, where members can actually create small groups. We have some of those starting to pop up right now. We just started a group called Depth Psychology as a Vocation. So that's for a small group of people who feel really called in that area and don't quite know what that looks like yet, or they're already starting to do some things, or they already have a practice and they just need support in that, whatever that is. So I just wanted to put that out there and say, if anybody who's listening to this is interested in doing something like that, please let us know. You can message any of us through the Alliance, or you can email info@depthpsychalliance.com, and we'll get those emails. But not just depth psychology as a vocation, but if you're really interested in shamanism, if you're really interested in dream work, if you're really interested in art therapy, whatever it is, we have the capacity to put those small groups together. And they can be done online through writing, of course. There's always that option on the Alliance. But they can also be done on software like this, so that we can see each other when we talk to each other. And it makes it so much more immediate, I guess, for me. So I like that. Or it can be done by phone and by voice. And so I just wanted to put that out there and say, you know, if you want to be involved with people in a certain way, let us know. Put it on the chat and say, hey, anybody else interested in forming a group on whatever it is? Post it on the bulletin board or in the forum, and really start putting it out there, because there are other people out there that want to do those same kinds of things. And we now, as a board and as the Alliance, have a lot of those tools available to us that we can help you actually put some of those groups together. If you want to publish maybe some of those groups will end up publishing papers together. Maybe you'll end up writing an anthology, or putting books together. Maybe you'll end up creating conferences. I don't know what it's going to be, but I think that there's so much work that can come out of this that will both allow you to advance your own vocation and calling, whatever that is, but also to make that available to other people who haven't quite found what they're looking for, or who just really want to be involved in learning more and connecting with others around a topic that they're passionate about. So that's a kind of a quick overview of what we're talking about and thinking about. Does anybody want to add anything to that I said?
I'd like to add just one thing, Bonnie, which is one place where the introvert and the activism kind of comes together is that if I'm an introvert, which I am, that means my inferior attitude is extroverted, which means as I work to become more conscious, I need to become more extroverted.
Yeah.
And so that's where the inner work goes. And it also means that if, because I'm an introvert, it's hard for me to put my work out there and talk with other people and all that kind of thing, that means that part of the problem of depth psychology, if as you say, many people are introverts who are into the Depth Psychology Alliance and into depth psychology, it means that part of the problem isn't just communicating depth psychology. It's part of the problem is learning how to communicate with extroverts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're introverted, and we need to learn how to talk to extroverts. Extroverts are interested in hard, scientific things, stuff like that. Somebody who's good with that is Anthony Stevens, who's very scientific, and he comes at Jungian psychology from a completely hard-nosed scientific way, and it's really much more convincing than some of the kind of flaky sounding talk about archetypes. And yet he's still talking about archetypes, but he does it in terms of schemas and response mechanisms and things like that. And so there are ways to talk about these things to an extrovert, and there are ways for me to do inner work, which means to bring on my sort of inner extrovert. So I want to throw that in.
Thank you, James. Fantastic observations. And I most of you guys know, I don't know about the audience so much, but I really have always identified as a pretty strong introvert myself. So I just want you guys to know, especially if you're listening to this, it was a huge thing for me to put myself out there and start posting on the Alliance. When I first started, I realized nothing was ever going to happen if I wasn't the one posting initially, because then there would be nothing on there. And so it was hard. And, I don't think that everybody has to necessarily push themselves, or if it just terrifies you to think about these, doing these things. It's a really good point. Communicating with extroverts is often very hard for me, and I had never really articulated that to myself. So I appreciate that. But I do want to say the extroverts that I know, which are very few, no, I'm kidding. The extroverts that I know who have a depth psychological background and who are interested in these topics are really I've had some of the most profound conversations I've ever had with them. And so, and maybe it's a meeting of, two people and a certain chemistry that comes into action. But I think all I'm saying here is there are opportunities to connect with people who understand other people who are introverts. And so that's a really exciting thought for me, that we can have sort of a container or a vessel, an alchemical vessel in which some of us can come together and do this. So just as we wrap up here, because we are at that time. Jonathan, I saw you have your hand up, actually. I'd love to give you a chance to say something if you'd like to. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. And okay, you should be unmuted. Go ahead if you have a question or comment.
Okay, I just would really congratulate you. This is a blessing. I mean, the way you've pulled this all together, I've kind of watched from the distance. I'm also an introvert. I thought the film was fantastic, and it's really good. What a vessel you've created. So congratulations. And I like the clarity on the self. I was looking at the self. I had worked with him back in the 70s, typed some of his books, and in Zurich there. And I was always curious about the self as object or as process or as verb and as an adjective, so the different ways. But I think we'll have.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Jonathan, do you go by Jonathan or JP or Paul?
J. Paul.
J. Paul, okay. Yeah. I'll try to remember that, because I've seen your name on the Alliance a lot, but because we've never spoken, I didn't know. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, you know what? That's probably a great topic of conversation for our next one of these. This whole idea of the self as a verb, that's really intriguing to me. So I appreciate you introducing that image, and I think there could be a lot of conversation around that. Of course, Hillman looked at soul as a process, right? Far more than and so I think there's some correlation there between that. So thank you. One last question. Thank you. One last question I just wanted to address really quickly. Somebody was asking about, said she was really hoping to hear about what depth psychology programs that we might recommend. And I don't want to go into that here per se. Each of us, I'm sure, has an opinion on that. I'd like to take that conversation to the Alliance, actually, and there have been a few of those. I know sometimes using the search function on the Alliance is not the obvious choice necessarily, but if you go in there and search depth psychology programs or depth psychology grad schools, you might come up with that conversation. But I would encourage everybody on this call, if you have an opinion on that, or you'd really like to just share your experience of a particular school or program, to go on the Alliance into the forum and post that there. And as soon as somebody posts the first one, then we can all just reply to that, and we'll have a thread there that will bring that together. So let's take that there, and I think that would be a great venue for it. We will plan to do some more of these kinds of things, and probably more often. I'm hoping we'll do monthly kind of options with just figuring out how to use the Alliance. I know it's not always that intuitive, but once you get to know it, it's pretty easy. I'd also like to really have a chance for all of us all to engage between the board and the members, because we were all just members before we were the board members. And so I think this would be a fantastic opportunity to really just get to know each other better. And then we'll be putting in place some of these programs. And one of those that I do see coming up is the opportunity for Alliance members to create courses and webinars. And so if you are currently teaching, but not teaching online, and you're interested in doing that, please let me know. I mean, who knows? Eventually this could turn out to be we can start doing certificate courses, which Craig, I know, has already offered one. And maybe eventually we'll start doing more formal courses, and this could turn into the mystery school that I think sort of is waiting out there for us, the Depth Psychology Institute or something, I don't know. But
Alliance University.
Yeah, Depth Psychology Alliance University. I like that. So anyway, we have a lot of hopes and plans and visions for this, and you guys are all a part of that. And I just wanted to say how grateful I am to the board members. Every one of you have been just so supportive and so amazing, and I'm just absolutely thrilled and honored to know each one of you. Again, the people you see on the screen: James Newell, Brent Potter, Craig Chalquist, me, Bonnie Bright, Eva Ryder, and then the ones that are not showing on the screen, Donna May, who's been on the chat function all this time, and thank you for doing that, tending that over there, Donna. And then we have Jesse Masterson, who may have had some weather issues and was unable to get on today. We have Michael Bogar, who was unable to join us, and then we have Mark Sipowicz, who was traveling with his family this weekend. So again, you can find their bios if you go under the About link, and then look for the administrative board there. All of our bios and pictures. And please message us through the Alliance. You can just go to anybody's page, and on the left-hand side, you'll see a message button. So you can message us, start some conversations about this in the forum if you're really interested. And we did just do a video recently that shows you how to add a post or share your work on the Alliance. So you can look for that video. I'll go and feature it and make sure that it's under the video section again so that you can find it. But the Alliance is meant for everybody. I mean, it's a community. So I hope you guys will share your work. Share if you publish a book. Come make a post if you graduate or if you start a new program. Let us know if you're starting a practice or you're looking for people to join your practice. If you're looking for a book, or if you just are excited about a book you read, whatever it is, come share, because this is the way that we're going to move forward, I think, in the field of depth psychology. It's through community, really, and I'm just excited about the opportunities. I wanted to close with, personally, with just a quote from Jung, which I have always found really profound, and it is a kind of on this vein, I guess, this sort of new move toward activism and becoming more of an activist community rather than just an academic community. And this is from Jung. Some of you guys will recognize this. He says, "Anyone who wants to know the human psyche will learn next to nothing from experimental psychology. He would be better advised to abandon exact science, put away his scholar's gown, bid farewell to his study, and wander with human heart through the world. There, in the horrors of prisons, lunatic asylums, and hospitals, in drab suburban pubs, in brothels and gambling hells, in the salons of the elegant, the stock exchanges, socialist meetings, churches, revivalist gatherings, and ecstatic sects, through love and hate, through the experience of passion in every form in his own body, he would reap richer stores of knowledge than textbooks a foot thick could give him, and he will know how to doctor the sick with a real knowledge of the human soul." This comes from Collected Works, The Psychology of the Unconscious, and the relations between the ego and the unconscious. And so, you know, again, we all have different backgrounds. Some people here are not psychologists. Some people here don't even have a background in depth psychology per se. Some people are authors. Some people are teachers. Some people are social workers. Some people are poets. Some people are artists. You know, I mean, we have a diverse background and we have so much to offer each other. So let's do that more. All right.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
so much,
Bonnie.
Bonnie.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you for everybody who's listening. And we'll see you on the Alliance. Take care, everyone.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.